Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Maverick News Channel. It is July 30th, 2026. And I know that most of you would like me to sit here tonight and talk about Anthony Fauci. But I'm not going to do that. We ran his testimony and his repeated, I'm taking the fifth to avoid incriminating myself lines, because I think the whole thing, and this is just my opinion, I think it was a setup to try to entrap him in some way with Rand Paul and the others there. I don't know what the hell's going on. How would I know? And all these other people who are commenting on this, I don't think they really know either, even though they, we have some of these documents, the diary of Fauci and everything else. I'll tell you this. This is just, again, my opinion. Whatever's going on, he's being thrown under the bus, and he's not the head of the snake. He's just, again, a scapegoat. And I'm still pointing my finger directly at the White House and the president, Donald Trump. He was the guy in charge, never fired him. He was, the buck stops with him. He made all the decisions, whether he was taking advice or not. So he has to accept responsibility. But whatever the heck is going on, once again, you're seeing the blame game being played. And I don't know what is really the truth. I don't know that we will ever know, but I do know this: Anthony Fauci is the fall guy. That much is very clear. Whether he's guilty on some level of something, who the hell really knows? But he was pardoned, maybe, I don't know. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know and then feed you a bunch of lines tonight just to build ratings and generate clicks. We're going to move on. And we're going to talk about something horrific, because there was a terrible missile strike in Ukraine. Again, civilian targets hit, civilians killed. We're going to highlight some of those stories for you tonight. And we're just going to talk about the war there again, because it needs attention. There are things going on there that do affect us directly, whether people care to admit it or not, because it's all interconnected, including the Ukraine war with the war with Iran right now, and it's having a direct impact on our lives. This is a global thing. We've got Mike McCarrick coming in. There's so much that has happened since the last time we really talked about this on any real in-depth level, that we need him here tonight to help us make sense of everything that has gone on and is going on tonight. And we've got these attacks. We've got a missile that cratered and was taken down in Poland. So we've got the possibility of a broader NATO involvement in this conflict. So don't sit there and think that this thing isn't important to you, and that we should ignore all of this and not be involved, because we are involved whether you like it or not. It is important, and we're going to talk about it when we come back after this with Mike McCarrick.
Maverick News. The new wave in news. Donate at maverickthenations.com.
Okay, let's bring Mike in. There he is. Welcome back, sir.
Hello, how is everyone tonight?
Well, I'm okay. I'm always afraid to look in the chat these days. but I think we're all right.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a rule to not look in the chat or not, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I should.
Generally speaking, I've got a very loyal and tolerant family here. And yeah, I'm actually quite lucky because they're here every single night. And so I appreciate every single one of them. Yeah, that is true. A lot of fighting goes on in there, though.
Fighting is, debate and spirited debate isn't inherently bad. Yeah. I would agree with that statement.
Yes, but I'm so glad you're here because we need your military expertise tonight. And maybe just, some people maybe still don't know who you are because we have had the channel growing over on YouTube and some other platforms, lots of new viewers. So maybe just introduce yourself again for our new people.
Sure. So for those that don't know or don't remember, my main name is Mike Pekarik. I served 22 years in the United States Air Force. My main job was missions related to strategic influence and or soft power. That was the idea that if you want to have allies and friends and trading partners, they should probably want to be your ally, your friend, and your trading partner. So it was the concept of I would help put a face to the United States that interact with, and a positive kind of a thing. As far as Ukraine is concerned, when I was stationed attached to European Command, that's one of America's global combatant commands. European Command, obviously from the name, is all of Europe. I also worked for Africa Command at that time. And I traveled through Ukraine many times, and even for groups in my unit, I would plan those missions that I was not necessarily participant in actually traveling in. So I know a lot of Ukraine. I've been to a lot of Ukraine. I know a lot of Ukrainians currently on the front lines. When this kicked off in 2022, I was messaging my friends in Kyiv because I have more combat training than a lot of them did. And they were mobilized into ad hoc infantry. So I was helping them out, trying to do some very immediate things. And ever since then, I've been helping them with uniforms, boots. After I retired from the military in 2023, I began doing more work that I could do outside of uniform. In the military, we talk about when you retire or you get out, you're being promoted to civilian. You gain a lot of freedoms when you leave the military. And one of them is that I could more directly help my Ukrainian friends because I wasn't an active duty military member. There were certain restrictions that were lifted. And so I joined an NGO, the leadership board on the NGO. I helped a lot in the drone efforts, both offensive and defensive drone networks. You can see a dead Russian drone behind me. In late of 2024, so it's about 18 months ago at this point, I spent some time in Ukraine. Sometime, obviously, you can't fly into Ukraine, so you train into Lviv and Kyiv. But then I went to the front lines in the Sloviansk and in Izium direction, and I spent some time with some frontline units there, saw the conditions, what was going on. Some of this was a little personal for me. One of the friends that I made in 2017, so 6 years prior when I was there, was a tank commander, and he helped liberate Izium from Russian occupation. And he discovered one of the mass graves in Izium because his tank rolled past a child's half-rotted arm sticking out of the dirt. This was an 8-year-old girl who had been tortured and raped in front of her parents and then executed and thrown into a mass grave. There are several thousand of those victims of Russian war crimes that were put into the dirt in Izium that they are being recovered. So I have various fronts of what my effort is on behalf of Ukraine. I've delivered combat uniforms that help their military comply with the international law of warfare distinction, and just help humanely, a soldier with a decent pair of boots. I've helped the drone effort. I help counter disinformation in social media and online. That was kind of the extent of what I've done. I have since resigned from that NGO. I spent about a year with them on my own, not related to the NGO. I've lobbied Congress several times. I'm in regular contact with my congressman and 2 senators. Because I have personal experience, I can sometimes give them information more quickly than they can get in any other way, because I speak daily with frontline soldiers.
Well, so you've seen it up close, and the true cost of the war is the human cost, the number of people
Yes.
killed, the casualties, and we've talked about the number of soldiers here fairly extensively, but the number of civilians killed is huge.
And one of the Russian war crimes is that they deliberately target civilians. It is a difficult thing for people who aren't familiar with the topic of what is and what is not a war crime or a valid target. A civilian dying is not necessarily, I added another extra syllable, sorry. It's not necessarily a war crime when a civilian dies. It's horrible. It's regrettable. And if you're the military person that is responsible for that death of a civilian, that's not something you get past. But it isn't inherently a crime. It is a crime when you deliberately target civilians. And so this isn't a weapon going off target that misses and hits something else. This isn't, I thought this target was something and it turned out that it wasn't. This is deliberately targeting civilians, and Russia's been doing that since the start. Part of this is genocidal. They don't believe that Ukraine is its own entity. They don't believe Ukrainian culture, the language, the arts, or the religion is distinct from Russia. And so one of their things is to wipe that out. And there is a more cynical and less intelligent, because it's actually kind of dumb, where they just say, we're going to start wiping out Ukrainian civilians so there's fewer of them. The reason why I say that's stupid is that it is not going to get you very far militarily. So if you want the war to end quick, you're not going to target civilians. That wastes time, it wastes effort, it wastes ammunition. And the effect that it's going to have on your enemy is it's just going to make them mad. It's going to give them a reason to fight back. If they were tired before and they see friends or children who are now victims, there's going to be a reason for them to fight now. And that should be easily understood, that if your neighbor or your children or the kids at the school, a dozen kids at the school have been heinously slaughtered, you're going to be mad. You're going to be looking for a way to do something about it. So that's why I say that it is stupid. It's stupid on a military level.
So I was looking up some numbers, and the
That's
civilian
good,
casualties.
I haven't looked up the civilian numbers in a little while.
Civilian numbers, like 60, I'll bring them up over here so I can see them. About 65,000 civilian casualties, including at least 16,000, maybe 17,000 killed. And the official figures are acknowledged as basically undercounts.
Yes. Because there's some people that were in buildings that we didn't know they were there when they were hit. We might find them in 100 years. We're still digging up bones out of World War I battlefields that we didn't know were there. Farmers been plowing that field for 100 years, and then somebody digs up a bone. We just found a new victim. So yeah, those are absolutely undercounts. It's I don't know if this is good or bad. It's lower than their military casualties, but 60,000 wounded and 16, 17, 18,000 dead is a lot.
That's just civilians. And
yes, that's just civilians.
We've talked about the number of military casualties, and between the two sides, we're into the millions.
Easy. Just the Russia has passed 1.5 million already.
Yeah,
that's just Russian casualties.
And then overnight, we saw Russia again with missile strikes inside Ukraine, and the targets hit. As far as I can see, with the exception, I think, of a drone factory that they went after that is owned by a U.S. company, which marks a first because I guess it's the first time a U.S.-owned facility has been hit by missiles inside Ukraine. That's the report that I'm getting tonight. Anyway, maybe you've got more information.
Yes and no, but it was a straight up, it was the first straight up attack. But they're going after what they've done the past years. They're going after Ukrainian heat, power, water, because winter is coming, as the Starks like to say. That this past winter was horrible. Everybody was relying on Jackery power packs and solar panels to keep their mobile devices working and run a hot water kettle so they could get something hot. So Russia is trying to set up another winter as bad or worse than last winter for Ukrainian civilians.
But most of the targets hit, I think just about all the rest overnight, were civilian. And that includes like apartment buildings, and they've been going after cultural buildings, libraries, museums, anything.
1,000-year-old mosque.
Yes. So they've been hitting targets like that. It's undeniable now that they're targeting them, because if they were just wayward missiles or drones that, were confused, you would not be getting this consistency in the destruction. And that's what we saw again overnight. And we've been talking about the number of casualties, but for human beings, that's like a stat. It's not real in the sense that you can't really relate to it. But what happened overnight is, I think people will understand when I show them this, and this entire family has been devastated overnight by a Russian ballistic missile that struck this home in the village of, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, maybe you have more knowledge of this.
Kryvyi Rih.
Yeah.
Something close to that. If I'm remembering correctly, that's also President Zelensky's hometown, which is one of the reasons they keep going back to it.
Right.
But I want you to look at this picture. The audience needs to look at this picture. And what would you do if you came across, and we're not talking they just fell down and died. We're talking violent, sudden explosive death. There's mangling, there's pieces missing, there's little pieces scattered everywhere. You might only be able to recognize it because you found a shirt attached to part of the body, or a bracelet on a severed arm. And look at that little girl on the left in the pink dress, the tiny little one, or the infant in the arms. You're finding these not just fell down dead. These are explosive deaths, mangled pieces of what used to be a human being. You can smell it. The blood is so vaporized, it's still hanging in the air for hours. The smell is something that you're never going to get used to. If anyone has smelled a city at war, I've said this, it's been a while since I said this on your program, but anyone that has smelled a city at war will never forget it. And part of that is the vaporized blood. Just try and internalize what that is like, not only for these people, which hopefully it was quick enough that they didn't suffer, but the survivors, the people that were not hit, that are now going in and collecting the remains for a proper sort of burial, that they're going to have to live with what they just saw. The entire nation, I mean, everybody nearby heard the hit and felt the concussion. That blast of air that is almost solid that goes off from high explosives. The effects on the survivors are not something to be underestimated either. So one of the things that I have done is that if anyone that I know needs someone to talk to, sometimes they just need someone to listen. Sometimes they just need to know that someone outside of Ukraine is thinking about them. And I've been that person, and it's an entire nation with PTSD.
So this is the Vorovnov family. There were 10 people inside the home at the time of the missile strike. And this is Artem and Olena. And you can see that they're holding up their ring fingers there, because this is obviously a wedding photo. And 7 of their children, aged between 6 and 17, and their 1.5-year-old grandson were, I guess, inside the home at the time. And so I know that this was overnight, and rescuers, you were talking about survivors. They've recovered the remains of at least 6 family members so far. And we know that the 2 parents and 3 of the children, 17-year-old boy, an 11-year-old boy, a 6-year-old girl, they're dead. And they did pull the family's dog, Rocky, out of the debris alive. The house basically just demolished, destroyed. Search teams are continuing to work through the rubble, still looking for remaining family members tonight. And officials say the force of the blasts really just left very little behind. And forensic experts are identifying the remains because, Mike, as you indicated, it just rips the bodies apart.
So if that doesn't make you mad or make you want to reach for the bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got a little bit of video, and this is all digitized. I am going to run this because, it'll take you to the scene tonight, but viewer discretion advised. Even though it's digitized, it is real. This is not AI. So I'm going to share this with you and just show you the reality of the war, which I think is important, because when you're just getting this through social media in a time when you don't know what's real and what isn't, it often just comes off as like watching a movie. But this is reality.
Воно ще лежать.
А тут
Тут діти.
дуже багато дітей. Дитину розкопали.
And there's another shot of the devastation. And that's what's going on in Ukraine. It is not just infrastructure. It's not just bridges and factories being targeted. It is consistently, night after night, civilian targets. And it's undeniable at this point. They can deny it all they want, but it's happening. Because you see it. You see the destruction. It's just right there in front of you.
And sometimes your brain goes numb to it. The capacity of humanity to get used to a new normal astounds me sometimes. But because like I said, I'm in daily contact with frontline soldiers, and so I see it. Civilians back in Kyiv aren't immune. But there's been more than 100 churches destroyed, schools, workout centers, just random things. One of my friend's daughters works in the very first McDonald's that went into Ukraine in the center of Kyiv, and that was hit the other day. They managed to repair it, and it was back in business inside of 48 hours. But that's just part of the resiliency.
Well, last week they struck a supermarket.
Yeah.
I don't see. targeting things on the civilian side is really an attempt to just demoralize the population, to try to undermine support for the war, I think, so people just tire of it. And
that's the argument, but
yeah.
people are tired. It's a nation robbed of sleep because the nights are full of attacks. But it just makes you mad.
Yeah.
It's the idea of, and you know that if you just give up, it'll be even worse. And so the idea of that this can happen motivates a lot of people to stand up and say, yes, put me in between the Russians and my family. I will fight back. This is pretty normal, what that picture that you're showing there.
Yeah, and it's repeated every night now. There's just these images of especially apartment buildings that are taking these direct hits from drones and sometimes missiles.
Yes. Mainly the drones, but that's just because the missiles are fewer in number. And evidently they're having a lot of problems getting their ballistics to work correctly. Excuse me. Yeah, it's mainly the hundreds of the Russians have their own name, but it's the Iranian Shahed drone that Iran sent to Russia years ago already for the first time. It's mainly those that are hitting.
Yeah, and that highlights the overlap of these wars and what's going on geopolitically. You're seeing the battle lines being drawn. The various countries are lining up, and the alliances are becoming more apparent if they weren't already. And you can see that Russia is aligned with Iran. And maybe you want to speak a little bit more to that. But for me, it just again proves that what's going on over there directly impacts us here in North America too.
Yes. Well, and just for any number of reasons. One of my impressions of Ukrainians, because the first time I went through there was in 2017, just a few years after their Maidan revolution, or what they call is their revolution of dignity, where they were fighting for their own dignity as a people, as a nation. And all of that was fresh in their mind. And it struck me as Ukrainians were all of the things that I saw, so much of the good things that I like about America in these Ukrainians. And of course they have the bad things too. People are people everywhere you go, but just the will and the desire to be free and independent really hit me the first time that I was there, and it just keeps hitting me. I know we're starting on a down note with the all the destruction, but it is important to realize that Ukraine has been fighting back. They're mad, and that drives all sorts of creativity and innovation that they've done. Those Shahed drones are launched by the hundreds every night, but Ukraine manages to intercept between 90 and 95% of them every night, and either intercept or spoof, where they'll send them off target into a field somewhere where they can't hurt anybody.
Heck, I saw last week real footage, not AI, of a propeller-driven aircraft of some kind, a two-seater, pilot front, somebody sitting in the back.
Oh, shooting down drones. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a Yak 52. It's a really old airplane. That's one way to do it, because the Shaheds are not very fast. Even the jet-powered Shaheds are not very fast. They've got these little quadcopter interceptor drones that go after them. They've still got cheap, what the military we call man pads. They're shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles with a range of about 2 miles. Those hit pretty well. F-16s do a pretty good job, although they tend to have the F-16s go after the cruise missiles. So the Shahed, the propeller-driven Shahed, is 100, 150 miles an hour, that ballpark. The jet powered Shahed is 250. Maybe it'll hit 300 on a good day. But those cruise missiles are going to be going at 600 miles an hour. And that's a little bit of a harder target to hit. But they don't have that many of them. They're expensive. The sanctions keep down the number that they can build. And what they can build tends to be of lower quality because they can't get the right electronics. There's been examples of them repurposing like washing machine computers into cruise missiles. But the F-16s go after them, among other things that those are doing. And then the ballistics are really scary because from launch to hit depends on where they launch, but ballistic missiles going to be Mach 5, Mach 10. And even if they're shot from a couple hundred miles away, you can cover a lot of ground really quickly. So from launch to hit might be 20 minutes tops. And that's all the time you have to react is 20 minutes versus the Shaheds and the cruise missiles. You might have an hour or even more of flight time to intercept them. Those slow Shaheds, they might be in the air for 2, 3, 4 hours. So you actually have some time like, okay, that's where they're going. But yeah, the ballistic missiles can be very scary because they launch and then they hit. It's very, very rapid. Those are the scary ones. And we talk about the United States is running out of Patriots ourselves. And we stopped giving Patriots to Ukraine about a year ago. That was JD Vance bragged in April about that was one of his greatest successes is, allowing Ukrainian children to be killed by ballistic missiles, evidently. But the Ukrainians, we kind of saw this coming when I was there in 2024. One of the reasons I was there, it was a joint NATO NGO mission to try and Trump-proof military supply to Ukraine. And one of those avenues was helping Ukrainians streamline their own innovation and production cycle. And we're seeing some of the fruits of that now. So some of their main attack drones that Ukraine's been using is the FP series. FP is Firepoint. That's the company that has been organizing it's not all inside that company, but they organize the innovation, figure out how to build it in quantity and then build it and use them by the hundreds. Their FP5 is the Flamingo, for example. That's their Flamingo cruise missiles, the FP5. FP1, FP2 have been going after supply lines, including Crimea. They had an FP7, which started out as a domestic Ukrainian ballistic missile to attack Russia, similar to Russia's Kinzhal missile. But when you have a rocket with a very powerful motor that goes very fast, one of the things that could be adaptable for is to intercept enemy ballistic missiles. So there's a version of that that is the FP7X that is started testing to intercept ballistic targets, I believe in late April or May. So it's already been in testing for a while, and they expect to have that in combat use later this year. So maybe late October, mid-November, something like that. So when we talk about the downers of, it's such a euphemistic word, the horror of civilians hit, the devastation, that 1,000-year-old mosque is on the UNESCO. I don't know if people know what a UNESCO World Heritage Site is, but that would be like Stonehenge, or in the United States, the ancient Pueblo ruins of Mesa Verde, or Notre Dame Cathedral. Just these amazing, the Colosseum in Rome, these amazing things that humans have built. The UN has a program to protect them. That's the UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a designation for something that is of significant value for all of humanity, not just locally. And if you've ever been to a place like Notre Dame, you would know what that means, because it's just amazing. And so, yeah, this monastery in it's down the river from central Kyiv. It's been there for 1,000 years. It was walkable for when I was staying there. Pardon me, I walked there in 2021, and as I was walking past, the monks were singing, and I walked in to just listen because it was wonderful. That was one of the things that they hit. So we can talk about all these horrors and war crimes, but the grit and the determination and the innovation of the Ukrainians themselves is absolutely astonishing. And this is what I say when I interact with Ukrainians. They're the best of what we could be. I mean it, and this is why. They have the determination, they have the follow through, they have the creative juices flowing, and they're doing amazing things. We can learn a lot from them, and we're trying to. So they are hitting. Russia is hitting Ukraine, but Ukraine is now also hitting Russia, and they have been for 2 years now. Ukraine started small. It's what they had, going after Russian oil and gas primarily, because the primary source of revenue for the Russian government, and that means that's the primary source of revenue that funds the Russian military, that funds Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is oil and gas sales. So Ukraine started going after the funding source, cut it off at the start. Currently, Crimea, the peninsula of Crimea, is out of oil. There's severe rationing. There's a funny story there that we can talk about in a little bit, but currently roughly 50% of Russia's oil refining capacity is offline. They just can't produce the gas. Even if they try and get it out of the ground, they can't turn it into a usable product. And so we're talking gasoline for cars, sure, but also cooking oil, if you want the more viscous oil, the propane that you might grill with, diesel that runs trucks and trains, and military equipment, especially generators. So you can't run a military radar without diesel. And so going after fuel, it's just, this is actually not one of the refineries. This is something that Ukraine just started recently, where one of the things that Russia has not been able to do is properly supply its own military. So a lot of soldiers and their families will try and buy military equipment to send to the front line. And one of the things that they do is the Russian version of Amazon called wild berries, for whatever reason. And these are their warehouses going up, something like 3 billion American dollars in just stuff that was in the warehouse. Stuff you would find in a random Amazon warehouse is just incinerated. But I also included some screenshots of some of the things that you can find on wild berries. And I think I included the disclaimer saying that the website was watching me. Did you find those? But you can buy plate carriers, Kevlar body armor. Anybody that's worn body armor knows that when I say plate carrier, there's a ballistic plate that you stick inside of the Kevlar, and that Kevlar will protect you from shrapnel, maybe a knife. Good luck. It probably will stop a sidearm round, but that plate will stop a rifle round. So there's all of these things. I didn't get the pictures of night vision and drones. I figured 2 pictures of obvious military use body armor was good enough, but they buy drones that the soldiers convert. They buy electronic warfare. They buy night vision, encrypted radios, just all the things that Russia itself is not supplying to its army is being supplied by wild berries. So that's why it's a target.
Okay, I've got some of those images here. I've been trying to get them up on the screen. Here we go.
So when I talk about you're looking at that. When I talk about Ukraine going after the oil, we've talked about this this somebody made up a bingo card and I couldn't find an updated one, so I added some of the more recent strikes. The ones that are completely flamed out or completely destroyed. The ones with the smaller marks have been hit, and each mark is a hit. So like that top left has been hit twice, for instance. Half of their 20 largest are gone.
So what's the value militarily in these kinds
You're
of
cutting. So when you cut off the oil and the supply routes, I have a different map that shows their mid-range strike capacity. You're burning up all of the trucks that are bringing food, water, body armor, clothes, drones, night vision. You're blowing up the trucks, bringing those to the frontline troops, right? So they can't get the supplies they need to actually fight. In some cases, they can't even get enough clothes to wear because Ukraine's been so successful destroying those trucks, destroying the bridges, destroying the railroads. But they decided that since they now have domestically produced long-range weapons that can be accurate, they can go even more towards the source. They don't even need to hit the truck because it's never going to make it onto the truck. That's why they're hitting them.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you had also some of the stuff that you were highlighting before.
Yeah. So when you think about diesel, you think about all of the Russian tanks. These are the plate carriers, the Kevlar. They have some outer patches on them, but their primary thing is to go across the vest to protect your core organs, your vital organs. If there's another one that'll show the plates, they're just like black trapezoidal things. But
these ones here.
And this has become, because Russia has been so unsuccessful at supplying their own troops, wild berries has become one of the primary supply sources for Russian frontline soldiers. They're literally getting the tools they need to fight from wild berries.
So they're not being supplied properly by the Russian government.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to buy their own body armor.
Yes.
Basically.
Well, and sometimes the new people arrive at their unit and the commanders will take all of their cash and force them to hand over any paychecks they might have. And then they'll go on wild berries and buy stuff for the troops that have actually survived, the veteran troops. So yeah, that's why Ukraine is going after them.
Brutal.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the old, by now, cliche phrase that amateurs study tactics and pros study logistics. And if you can cut an army off from its supply source, they're not going to be able to fight. You don't even have to kill anyone at that point. You just have to cut off their supplies. They can't get bullets. They can't get food. They can't get clothing. They can't get anything they need. And when you're talking about the fuel, they can't get the diesels to run the trucks, and the trucks have they tow the artillery. The trucks deliver new drones. The trucks will move things around. A diesel generator will run the radar systems. If you can't get fuel to the front line, there's a lot of things that they can't do. You're basically turning them into Napoleon's army. You know, they whatever they can carry on their backs is all they've got. So this gives some of the different ranges, and this is a little outdated. Ukraine, for instance, that bottom arc that couldn't quite reach the Kerch Strait, now it can hit the Kerch Strait. Because something actually hit there the other day. So you can see that white road that runs from Rostov on Don on the right side of the screen, and it runs north of the Sea of Azov through Mariupol, and then down into the Crimea Peninsula, and then over the Kerch Bridge. That road is the primary target of Ukrainian. We call it, in military parlance, we call that interdiction, where you're going after their behind the front line supply. That road has just been hammered. There's an average of two trucks every mile along that stretch of road that has been knocked out by Ukraine. And that's just the ones those are the ones they haven't been able to recover. So it's higher than that, but it's just an astonishing level of devastation Ukraine's been able to wreak. The problem with this is that if you zoom back out, I don't remember if it's on this map or not. I sent you a different map last time I was here. But the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, there is a road that runs from Rostov inside of Russia all the way up to Moscow, and you can still see it's under the arc, but it hasn't been, it's the M4 highway is what it is. It's not on this map. But they have been less successful on that road. I don't know if they just haven't tried as hard. But that other road, the M4 that runs from Rostov to Moscow, that is the one that's supplying the Russian efforts in Donetsk and Luhansk, which is the only part that Russia is still successful at.
And we have gas lineups, fuel rationing.
Russia-wide, but Crimea is basically out of gas. And more than out of gas, and I mentioned things like radars and things like that, but that's also runs their electricity power grid. They can't run their fresh water supplies without fuel. So power and water are on in Crimea for less than 12 hours a day. This was Putin's crown jewel. This was, Putin says, we're taking Crimea. This is Russia at its finest. And Ukraine is making it uninhabitable for the Russian army. There's been more recent, the last 48 hours. There's been queues, to use the British term, traffic jams for America, of people trying to get out of Crimea, civilians trying to get out of Crimea. That's one of the reasons the bridge is still up, is to allow a civilian escape route. The Russians themselves are prohibiting civilian vehicles from going that northern route north of the Sea of Azov, but the Kerch Strait Bridge is still open to civilian traffic for now anyway. But that mile was 10 miles long. That line just to get on the bridge was 10 miles long. And if you're in a traffic jam in a place that doesn't have fuel, and you're in a 10-mile long traffic jam, that's a problem in and of itself. So are you pushing your car for those 10 miles to get onto the Kerch Bridge, leaving it off, you're not burning any gas, just so you can get out? Because a 10-mile line to get through a security checkpoint to get onto the bridge, that's a 2, 3, 4 day line. So yeah, Ukraine is working to make Crimea uninhabitable for the Russian military. And even still, Russia is advertising Crimea as a vacation destination, which is insane. But that's the way it is. One concept, I don't know if some of your listeners might know, but Ukraine over the last few months has been doing what appears to be what we call preparing the battlefield. It's setting up a condition for a future Ukrainian offensive operation. And as the pieces start to fall into place, I don't think it'll be quite ready to go until they can cut off that M4 highway, or with the Wildberries attacks, they can cut off supply to the Russian soldiers that are going after Konstantinivka and Liman and Sloviansk. Those are the main efforts in eastern Ukraine. That's going to be when they can cut that off. That's going to be when that has been prepared. But it's already close. The Russia's radars are getting hammered. If they have the diesel to run the radar, Ukraine is going after that radar. Ukraine has managed to achieve a certain amount of air superiority over the battlefield, at least in terms of drone warfare, not in terms of fighter jets yet. They don't have enough modern jets. But in terms of drone warfare over the battlefield, it's something like 3 out of every 4 drones is Ukrainian at this point, just because they've been so successful in preparing the battlefield, setting up conditions for victory. So that's what they're doing. At least that's what it appears to be doing. They had some shakeup at the top. They fired the wrong guy first, but then they fired the right guy. The Syrskyi guy is not necessarily a bad guy. I'm not saying he's disloyal, but he's very old school. And when you're talking about very old school in an Eastern European former Soviet republic in the military, that guy on the right, Syrskyi, he's very old school. He's very embedded in the old Soviet type of military operations, which is exactly not what Ukraine needs right now. That's top-down leadership. You have to be a lieutenant colonel to have any authority, any decision-making ability. Your sergeants aren't worth their stripes. They've got no authority. They've got no experience. They've got no training. And it's completely opposite of what Ukraine's been trying to build. It's opposite of how any modern Western military functions. NATO actually has a standard where if you have a certain rank, these are the duties and the responsibilities and the authority that all NATO members have as expectations. So if you are enlisted grade 6 or enlisted grade 7 in the Air Force, which was what I was, that's technical sergeant or master sergeant, you have real authority. You're going to be overseeing a budget of $2 million, that kind of stuff. You have real authority. You can command units up to 60 people. That's not the old Soviet model. So yeah, Syrskyi had to go. I don't think he was
Fedorov
bad.
was fired.
Yes.
But then there were protests, right?
Yes.
And because he was popular. And
he's also very smart and very innovative. He was the wrong person to fire. He was doing some really good things.
Right. And now I don't think either one of them is in charge. Now they have somebody else.
Yeah, so they got, and I can't pronounce the new guys. So both the people flanking Zelensky here are gone now. Although they hired Fedorov back, the guy on the left has been hired back into a different position. But the new guy that replaced Syrskyi, he was a low-level unit commander at the start of all this back in 2014. When the little green men came out of Russia and pretended they were Ukrainians. He won a whole lot of street cred all the way back then, but he's fully embraced the new mode of your sergeants. You need to delegate your authority to your sergeants and that kind of stuff. The guy that replaced Syrskyi is actually quite good. That was one of the best moves that you could have made. I don't know the internal politics of Ukraine well enough to know why it went down like this. I have been told that Syrskyi had, and this is very old school Russian, he had certain political clout and people supporting him that made firing him difficult. And there was a clash between Fedorov and Syrskyi that Zelensky felt, for whatever reason, and this is me not understanding the politics well enough, felt that he needed to fire Fedorov. But then I don't know if he did that because he knew the Ukrainians population would not like that. And it wasn't just in Kyiv, it was Ukraine-wide that Ukrainians were taking to the streets and demonstrating because Fedorov was doing great things and Syrskyi is in the past. He's not a man of the future. So I don't know if he did that to get the people on his side and make the firing of Syrskyi politically possible. Going back to a very cynical phrase of politics is the art of the possible. Not necessarily the art of doing the right thing. It's the art of what you can actually accomplish. And so maybe he felt that he couldn't politically fire Sirski without mass demonstrations, and he had to figure out a way to make that happen. That's me speculating a little bit, but that's the way it turned out.
So speaking of politics, just to bring it back to the home front, and it's actually international. Last time you were on, we mentioned Laura Loomer, and she seems to be
Yes.
doing this like PR tour, and it seems like because she has access to the president that
Maybe she's finally recovering from her bout with Mar-a-Lago face. Sorry. That was a dig on the plastic surgery and the body enhancements that everybody, male and females, be undergoing in Trump orbit. But she was almost to the point of vile on how she described the Ukraine-Russia thing. I mean, we started talking about the war crimes and the horrors that Russia is inflicting on Ukraine. She was all for it. She was, it was ugly, the things that she had to say. And I don't know what happened, but now she's a Ukraine supporter, and I don't know what turned her around. I've got various thoughts, both charitable and not charitable, about what happened, but the end result that she is now vocally, vigorously supporting Ukraine is a good thing, because that got Zelensky on Sean Hannity, who is one of those MAGA guys on Fox News. If anybody doesn't know who Sean Hannity is, Zelensky in the White House was apparently well received. The far cry from spring of 25, when Trump profoundly ignorantly, one of the dumbest things that's ever come out of a president's mouth, told Zelensky that he didn't have any cards to play in this war. And it's been nothing but Ukrainian success and gains since then. It's like all of these cards Zelensky just started, they were in process, and now they, one after the other, they were playing. Operation Spiderweb, for instance, was already in progress. The drones that destroyed those strategic bombers were already en route when Trump told Zelensky he didn't have any cards to play. It's just stupid. But it's all the way from there to now, where he's warmly received at the UN conference. Trump announced that Ukraine would be licensed to build Patriot missiles inside Ukraine. And just the turnabout is astonishing. And Laura Loomer's been known to have Trump's ear in the past. So if she's vigorously supporting Ukraine and she has Trump's ear, I can call her an ally if that's what we're agreeing on.
Yeah, it's a huge turn of events there. And the interview with Hannity, I was aware of it. I've seen like a little.
I haven't watched it.
I haven't watched it either, so I don't know. But I get the sense that it was very. It was a friendly interview with Zelensky this time.
Yeah. Where before they were trying to kid him and gotchas and all sorts of weirdness, and
So that's a big shift, and I think that's very significant. Given,
notably, J.D. Vance was not present at this White House meeting, and he was very visible and very vocal in that horrifying one 18 months ago.
Yeah, where Zelensky said, "Have you been to Ukraine?" And he said, "No, but I've seen the stories."
Well, he'd bugged him about the clothing he was wearing. Stupid stuff.
It was terrible. Just awful. So, which brings me also to this, one of the reasons I'm glad you're here tonight is because I've been seeing, various things in our chat in recent weeks. Most recently, somebody referencing a book that, as I haven't read the book, but when I went to look it up, it seemed to be a regurgitation of the standard narrative coming from the Russian side that, the war is happening and happened because Russia was provoked because of NATO expansionism and U.S. coup inside Ukraine and the Maidan protests, et cetera, et cetera. But, over time, as much as I've listened to all that, and as much as there might be grains of truth to some of that, ultimately, I don't need to read the book. I'm aware of the narrative. I may read the book, but I've already read the other books. I've already been exposed to the
You've
narrative.
heard this
So I'm
argument.
very familiar with it already. And the synopsis that I read about the book indicates to me that it's really a rehash of this, which is
Yes.
why Professor Mearsheimer, who a lot of this rhetoric comes from, is endorsed the book.
Yeah.
Right, because it's him being echoed, in my view, in having not read it, but reading the synopsis, to be fair. Nevertheless, none of it really matters in my view, and I'll get you to comment on this. Here's where I'm at with it. It doesn't matter because Ukraine is a sovereign country and Russia invaded Ukraine, regardless of all those other justifications, reasons, excuses. Nothing justifies what Putin has done by invading Ukraine. It's a sovereign country. I'm actually taking a course at the University of Alberta right now studying Ukraine history, and the desire of the people of Ukraine to have their own sovereign, independent nation stretches back hundreds of years, if not, well, further than that. And
Ukraine is older than the idea of Russia.
right. It's just so this notion that Putin basically sees it as, he's trying to say that it's not a real country, that it should just be part of Russia, that they don't really have a culture, they're not real people. But it's just, it is not true. And you can see the resilience, the determination, which is still alive today in spite of everything the Ukrainian people have been through for so long, really kind of being a doormat for whether it was Nazi Germany or the Soviet communists coming back the other way. It's just they've tried to find their independence. You can argue it this way or that way, whether they were doing it properly at any given time. But the point is, it's a sovereign nation and nothing justifies Russia going in there and invading them. And they have been invaded. They're defending their country and their culture and their way of life. And that's where I'm at with it. So I don't see how any of that other narrative provides any kind of justification for what is going on.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of it might sound, if you're not familiar with the subjects, you don't know what NATO is, you don't know the history of Eastern European under Soviet rule. Eastern Europe, I'm having problems with the English language today. Sorry about that. But the history of Poland, Estonia, Ukraine, Romania, all those nations that existed under Soviet rule, the horrors that was for 50 years or longer in the case of Ukraine, because it was absorbed, I believe, 1922 or so. It was part of the Russian Empire. It declared independence, I believe, in 1917. This is 6-month-old memory here, so correct me if I'm wrong. But there were several years when, after the Tsar was overthrown and the Russian Empire toppled, the whites were fighting the Reds. The Bolsheviks eventually won. But while the whites were fighting the Reds, Ukraine was an independent nation. And it's like one of those little tangents of history that nobody knows unless you were from that area. So it's not even that Ukraine hasn't been its own nation in the relatively recent past. We're talking 1917, 1922. That's the age of jazz in the United States. That's when jazz started. So it's and there's other things. I interjected that where the city of Kyiv existed before Moscow did. That Christian Orthodox monastery that Russia hit had been in existence for 300 years before Moscow was founded. Ukraine has a deep history, different language. Russian, thank you is spasiba. Ukrainian is zhakuyu. My accents might be a little bit off, but completely different words. They're related languages, but so are Spanish and Italian, or German and French, or German and English. German and English were the same language 600 years ago ish. And so it's they're just completely separate, and nothing. When you dig into it, NATO is a defensive treaty. If you read the articles, you study the history of NATO, it is a defensive treaty. The only time any sort of military actions have been evoked, they have been defensive. For instance, after 9/11, NATO declared war on Al-Qaeda because the United States, a NATO member, was attacked, and that was the only time Article 5 has been invoked. That's the if you attack one of us, you attacked all of us. There are other things. Article 4 is slightly less. It's not quite Article 5, but it's a defensive treaty, and you don't have to dig any deeper than Trump going into Iran. United States is, you could argue, it's the dominant nation in NATO, where it's the majority of the military power. We have something like 45% of NATO's population, 65% of NATO's GDP, economic power. And we went into Iran, and you can talk about how stupid that was, but obviously the NATO nations are like, what are you doing? And Trump was like, hey, come help us. They're like, why? How? Why should we? How does this make any sense? And that's NATO. It's a defensive treaty. It's not an offensive treaty.
Right.
It was never made to conduct offensive operations. That's not its purpose. It has its roots in World War II. I don't know if people know that, but the reason NATO exists is when they put General Eisenhower in charge of the Allied forces in Western Europe. He was looking at commanding not just American forces and Canadian and British forces, which were separate enough to cause some ruffles, but at least we more or less spoke the same language, right? But you also had Free French, who didn't have any arms and needed to be resupplied. You had significant numbers of Polish troops. That's an Eastern European language. So just Polish is far away just on a basic language level. You had Belgians, you had partisans, you had, there was at least one fighter squadron out of Mexico that fought in the United States Army Air Corps. So it was like this giant mass of different things that Eisenhower had to make work. And what came out of that is the understanding that for these allies to be successful in the future, we needed to have some sort of defensive treaty that would standardize things like radio talk. Aviation talk is part of that NATO standardization. Aviation English is a real thing. You have to learn aviation English to be a pilot. The phonetic alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, O, Charlie, the military version. So all of these standardizations, what ranks do, just all of these standardizations. And it was this, how do we get people to work together to defend ourselves against, the Nazis, right? That's the start of NATO. So that argument, it makes exactly no sense once you dig into the history of Ukraine, once you dig into the history of NATO, once you dig into the history of the Eastern European nations that had to survive Soviet oppression for decades, and once free of it, said, we need to be part of NATO. We desperately want to be part of NATO. We want nothing ever to do with Russia. We want some help protecting ourselves from Russia. So it was like one of those, instead of asking why NATO is expanding closer to Russia, the question should be, why did nations close to Russia desperately want to be part of NATO? And that's a far more interesting question, and it hits far closer to the actual truth.
Yeah,
And
and you know,
the part of the argument that makes me mad, you can tell I'm getting a little worked up, is that it's so superficial. It's counting on someone who is ignorant of the issues. And I'm sorry if that insults anybody that agrees with this, but it's true. The only way that that argument makes sense is if you're ignorant of the issues that it's raising. Because on the surface level, it might seem plausible, but you dig just a little bit deeper and you're like, that makes no sense whatsoever. And you dig deeper, and you're like, this just gets worse. The more the idea that Ukraine, the NATO expansion was against Russia and that Ukraine's not its own nation, it should be part of Russia. It just, those ideas get worse and worse the better you understand why Ukraine wants its independence, or why Poland is so heavily investing in its military, or why Romania so desperately wanted to be part of NATO. The Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they're desperate to be part of NATO.
and if you want to talk about provocation, just look at what happened overnight. Another missile crossing into NATO airspace, in this case, into Poland. Can you speak to that?
I think Putin is trying to test NATO. I don't know how many of these incursions are deliberate, because like I said, Ukraine does have spoofing as part of their defensive electronic warfare, what we used to call electronic countermeasures, but electronic attack and electronic defense have all been rolled into one electronic warfare thing. Where if you spoof something, sometimes it is difficult to predict where it's going to go. So I think at least some of the drones that landed in Poland were spoofs that weren't necessarily Russian intent, but a cruise missile is harder to spoof. So that one seems like either they just had a junk cruise missile, which is in Russia is very possible. Their military gear is crap, but I think there's enough of them that Russian incompetence and Ukrainian spoofing can't account for all of them. And there's been other incursions into Lithuania and Estonia, and it hasn't all been drones. Some of it's been electronic warfare on the Russian side. This also includes cyber warfare, so hacking and anything involving electronics. It's the whole electronic realm that going after banking systems, water purification systems, power grids, things like that. And so I think Russia is trying to push NATO to see how far he can push NATO before they respond, before they actually say this is the red line, it's now an act of war. I don't know where that line is. It would be a little bit frightening to have that line get crossed while Trump is president. But you never know. Because once things like that start rolling, who's president might not actually matter as much, if that makes sense. That we would have to respond, and there's certain actions that we would be that are hardwired in that we'd have to do. But or like Zelensky firing Fedorov, that if Trump didn't do them, then Americans would be in the streets in huge numbers going, what the heck? So that's what I think that is that some of it's incompetence, some of it's spoofing, but some of it is Putin trying to push to see where the line is.
It does scare me to think of what might happen if something like that goes down and Trump is still in the White House, because he's not supportive of NATO, in my view.
You were talking about this war is spreading. One of the things, one of the parts of history that I know the most about is World War II for various reasons. The gear fascinates me for no other reason. But people think, World War II started in 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland. And let's not forget that it wasn't just the Nazis. It was the Nazis and the Soviets invading Poland from different directions because they were allies at that point. But when you talk to historians, they're like, that's not quite where it is, because one of the most brutal, most evil war crimes in all of World War II happened between December 1937 and January 1938. And that was over in the Chinese city of Nanking, because the Japanese had invaded. They had done a first invasion of China in the earlier 30s. I'd like to say 1931, but don't quote me on that. But then in 1937, they did a pretextual thing, just like the Nazis did in Poland, where they pretended that the Chinese did something as a justification for another invasion. They went into Nanking and just slaughtered people over a period of roughly 6 weeks. And it was one of the most horrific war crimes of World War II, and it happened before the official start of World War II. And so some people think that World War II started in 1937. And then I mentioned that earlier 1930s thing. Some people think that World War II actually started that first Japanese invasion of China, and that's when it actually started. And then there's other people that make the argument that both world wars were in fact one big war. They just had an interlude, that the war never actually stopped. So there's arguments to be made for that. But if you consider 1937 the start date, that was 4 years before the United States entered the war, because we didn't come in until Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. And so just these time lags. And now, so you saw the Russians have been doing all sorts of things. Their cyber attack on Estonia, I'd like to say 2007, should have been an act of war. NATO should have responded to that one. I think the only reason we didn't was because our cyber defenses weren't sophisticated enough to actually understand the attack until months afterwards, and possibly years. Our entire cyber warfare effort in the United States Air Force, at least, was completely revamped after that. But then Russia did their big invasion in 2022. Iran has been making noises for a while. Hamas had that attack on Israel in 23. That was an Iranian proxy attack through Hamas. Iran and Russia have been working together for a while now, long before either 22 or 23. And so as this spreads, and now the Houthis I think they just hit an Egyptian port in sometime in the last 24 hours. I just saw that. I saw it just before we came on, so I didn't have time to read what was going on. But they're threatening the Red Sea. The Persian Gulf's kind of on fire now. So it's spreading. And the scary thing about all this is, did World War II actually start 4 years ago in Ukraine? And that should kind of terrify all of us.
So I'm just looking it up. It says Yemen's Houthi movement has officially denied responsibility for a drone strike that sparked a fire on 2 gas vessels at Egypt's Mediterranean port of Damietta.
Who denied?
Egyptian authorities confirmed the attack involved a drone. They have not yet assigned formal blame. And of course, we've got this big problem in the Red Sea and that other choke point.
Yeah, the Houthis there. And when I talk about diesel being so vitally important to Russia, the oil supplies in the rest of the world are running low because we haven't been getting the oil out of the Persian Gulf. The United States has a lot of reserves in the ground. We don't necessarily have the refining capacity, but Canada has a lot of reserves in the ground. Our refineries are set up better to refine Canadian oil than the type of oil we find in the United States. So we'd either have to build new refineries or revamp our existing refineries, which would take months at the minimum, to produce domestic American oil. There's oil in the Gulf of Mexico. I refuse to say the Gulf of America. Mexico has other oil sources. South America has oil sources. So the UK, the North Sea has oil. There's oil in a lot of places that are not the Persian Gulf, but China gets like 90% of their oil from the Persian Gulf. They run their agriculture off of it. And I mentioned diesel being important to the Russia's military effort, but it's also important to Russian farmers because tractors, harvesters, all of those things that process the grain tend to run on diesel. And there's been examples of Russian farmers selling their diesel because the black market, you can get $60 a gallon for it, which is huge. I don't know if you can do the math in your own head on what $60 a gallon for diesel looks like, but that's what the black market is for it. And then if the rest of the world's starting to run out of reserves, there are real worries about India and China actually being able to get their harvest in properly. And that's a thing in Russia too, is their food supply going to be affected. But now with this Iranian stuff, there's problems in the rest of the world. So, Mad Max, anybody, we're fighting for the juice in Oil Town, Gas Town. Was that what it was called in Mad Max 2?
Yeah, I don't remember it. But yeah.
So there's jokes too. Jokes abound about that, but that's the part that terrifies me, is that if this is we actually are staring down another global conflict, I don't think people actually understand how horrible that would be.
And I don't think we've seen the true impact from this war on the world economy yet, because
no, not yet.
I mean, you've just talked about the impact on agriculture and harvests, and that's really still to come, right?
Yeah, and it can still be, in my opinion, it can still be deflected. There's going to be pain. There's going to be inflation. All of the extra fuel costs are going to be passed on to consumers. There's going to be a lot of turmoil, but I think the worst of it can still be deflected. But it's got to start making sense soon. Otherwise, there's going to be more serious trouble.
But I'm not seeing any sense, or really any real strategy.
I chose my words carefully there because it makes no sense to me either.
Yeah, and all I'm seeing at this point, and all I'm getting even from what I'm reading, is it looks like Trump is maybe just gonna escalate the bombing. There are reports of, I guess, more of a buildup in terms of resources and manpower in the Gulf, but I'm not sure how accurate that is. And it seems like I don't think there's any will to put boots on the ground, if you will.
Well, and that's one of the problems, because that comes from Hegseth, because he thinks that boots on the ground is going to give us another forever war. But sorry, you just got another forever war, because nothing's going to get resolved here, and you just empowered a far worse government inside of Iran that now thinks they can close off the strait and get away with it.
Yeah.
And so, or start charging tolls. Just turn a free waterway into a serious economic choke point and real problem. But I mentioned this on your program before, that air power, and General Kane said this actually at a congressional hearing, which I'm glad he said, was that air power doesn't usually win wars. And there might be one argument in the Bosnia, Kosovo conflicts that air power might have brought things to a halt. That's the only historic example I can think of where air power was that decisive. And I mentioned on the program before is that what air power does is it knocks out a lot of immediate capability. It can knock out some of the leadership. It can certainly sow chaos in command and control, so that the person that you're attacking can't competently put together a defense. But that is only going to last for a limited amount of time. So for a week, maybe 2 weeks after they started bombing earlier this year, was the window that we could have sent in serious numbers of ground troops and actually occupied things with minimal or even no casualties. It's possible just to roll in because they were that disrupted. That by the time the Americans had already arrived and already dug in and already very much put themselves into a place to control it and push back any sort of counterattack, that was when the Iranians would have finally been able to mount any sort of defense at all. And even that would have been small. But we're well past that. Iran spread out their command and control. They spread out their decision-making authority. That's one of the problems, is when we negotiate a ceasefire, each one of those fanatical Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders has unique authority to launch an attack without asking for permission. That's the distributed authority that I was talking about. And so you get these random attacks that these guys are throwing out. And that's the chaos that we just created. So, but I still don't see any way out of it short of ground troops. I just don't. I don't see how this goes.
Or I think there's a really easy way, which is declare victory
and walk away,
and then just go home.
But that would
then mount a public relations campaign to convince the American people that it's a victory.
Well, that's what he might do. But that's going to leave the Strait of Hormuz not a free waterway.
Right.
It's going to leave India and China, so that's roughly 3 billion human beings, with a choked supply of fuel. It's all sorts of bad stuff will happen by just walking away. There's any number of reasons this is stupid, because the thing that made all of this go sideways is deciding to attack in the first place. And as soon as they made that decision, all sorts of good choices just went away. And all you have left are bad choices. So walking away is a bad choice. Putting ground troops in now, after what, 5 months, 6 months? Where are we at this already?
5 months, yeah.
Well past that initial confusion and window of opportunity that air power could create. You might be able to create a smaller version of that now with an overwhelming display of force and then insert ground troops, but it's not going to be anything like it was the first week of March. So yeah, that's now a bad decision because they decided to do it wrong in the first place. There's just, it makes me wonder if he took lessons from Putin. You know, Putin decided he was going to do a 3-day special military operation in Ukraine, and here we are 4.5 years later. Yeah. And somebody sold to Trump that this Iran thing would be as quick as Venezuela, and here we are 5 months later, and it's worse than it was before we started. And it's just, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare
because of this.
Yeah. Anybody that doesn't know what a THAAD is, that's Theater High Altitude Air Defense. That is one of the two, the other being the Patriot. That is the American missile systems capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, at least in some capacity. Patriot and THAAD are older systems that have been, they started out a long time ago. They've been so heavily modernized that they're new systems today. But what that means is the Patriot, the PAC-3, the newest version of the interceptor, is the one that's actually good at intercepting ballistic missiles. The PAC-2 can do it. The PAC-1 kind of had a roll the dice chance of hitting a ballistic missile, but was really great against aircraft. You know, so that's what we're looking at here. And you can see that the pre-stupid numbers, after the people generously call it a ceasefire numbers, you can see that we basically cut our supplies more than in half.
Yeah.
There's some question because this was put together by CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, based off of official government documents and manifests and orders, because you have to authorize the purchase of new missiles and all that. They put a little disclaimer saying there might be 200 or 300 PAC-2 missiles that were not accounted for in any of those numbers. So the pre-stupid number instead of 2,300 might have been more like 2,700, and then it would have gone down accordingly, but it wouldn't have changed the look and the proportion of these graphs. They just said that the actual numbers might not be completely accurate.
So how long would it take to produce enough to restock?
It depends on the munition. You can see that the number of THAAD missiles has actually gone up since the ceasefire because they've actually been able to deliver more. But the Patriots, we're talking at least 5 years to get back to pre-stupid levels. But that's if the production rates remain the same. And since 2022, in 22, Biden put us on the trajectory more towards a wartime production footing. Obama all the way back in 2014 and the first Russian invasion started revamping the American military against a possible future war against a peer nation, whether that was Russia or China. And so this isn't in a complete vacuum, that we're not starting from scratch. But there's limited supply chain. One of the bottlenecks is basic rocket motors. You can't produce the rockets fast enough. We're not talking electronics or warheads or anything like that, or the outer fuselage of the missile or the wings or anything. You're talking the basic rocket fuel. That's a bottleneck in getting these things produced. But one of the things that Biden did is we had one source for rocket fuel in 2022. By the time Biden left office, there were 3 more, including a patent on one that was more of a 3D printing concept that would produce the rocket motors at something like 10 times as fast. That's just now coming online in 2026, just to give you a line on the lag on how the innovations and when they actually arrive on station can be. Where this thought, somebody probably said, can we build rocket motors faster in 2022? And now it's 2026 and we're finally getting somewhere on that.
So it just seems to me as a layman that based on that graph, just the straight up numbers, based on the reports about that from the New York Times in the past week, I think, that to now mount an even more aggressive, larger, overwhelming air campaign to bomb the hell out of Iran would take stupid and make it even stupider.
So those numbers were only on defensive missiles. You could reconfigure these to be ground-to-ground strike.
The only reason I say that, though, Mike, is because if you do that, you're just escalating things, and then you're going to get more of an attack. And so everything,
yes,
you're just blowing your inventory, and to what end?
The attack, we didn't look at Tomahawk numbers on that, but now we have our own American version of the Shahed drone. I don't know if you were aware of that. We took the basic design and completely scooped out all the guts and put in a precision targeting system and things like that. We've been using that on Iran, which is ironic, we basically stole an Iranian design, made it a lot better, and used it against Iran. But one of history's ironies right there. But so the attack missiles are not the same, and Iran does have fewer offensive ballistic missiles that these are the most important on. But China, do we have enough to defend Taiwan anymore? Do we have enough to defend South Korea anymore? If Russia somehow managed to find the strength to go after NATO, would we have enough defensive missiles for Russia? And so those are I think we can still handle Iran, but we have no capacity to defend Taiwan or South Korea right now. And that's frightening. I'm sure that Taiwanese and the South Koreans are not terribly thrilled right now.
So no good options.
Once they did stupid, all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of bad options.
Any predictions on where you think this might?
I never thought
Are we into another forever war? Is that what this is?
I don't see a lot of appetite, even though I think the only way out of this is to commit ground troops, and you got to do it soon and as big as numbers as fast as you can get them there. Because we only have half of our Marines left. Half of our Marines went home. At one point, we had 5,000 Marines on ships ready to go in. Now it's only 2,500. Those could be thrown on an airplane and sent back. And you can put Army troops on the ground, but they don't have any heavy equipment. So this would be like a 6-month buildup to get into any serious ground forces, maybe 3 months if you push it. But Iran is 90 million people. That's how big of a population they have. They're bigger than Iraq was. I know we rolled through Iraq quick, but we also, took 6 to 12 months to build up the ground forces to do it.
Well, it's spiraling out of control, because it was just yesterday that there was a U.S. Saudi, very strategic and focused attack inside Iraq. And I'm like, here we go. We're back to Iraq now. What the hell is going on?
Well, so, because the 2003 invasion of Iraq wasn't the smartest thing that ever happened either. It was smarter than this, but, when you got one of the things Saddam did is he was ruthless and brutal. Yes. But he was ruthless. And one of the things he was ruthless and brutal about was putting down pro-Iranian and Al-Qaeda cells inside of Iraq. So while Saddam was in charge, there were no Iranian-backed militias or Al-Qaeda cells inside of Iraq. They just weren't. As soon as they got the first whiff of them, all of a sudden, literally heads were rolling. It was brutally put down. But once we broke it, then we bought it. Now Saddam's efforts to keep Iran and Al-Qaeda in check suddenly wasn't there anymore. And now it's the Americans' responsibility. Al-Qaeda in Iraq became worse and worse and worse. The Second Battle of Fallujah is one of the biggest battles the U.S. Marines have fought since World War II. And that was against Al-Qaeda, basically. But Al-Qaeda in Iraq got worse and worse until it became ISIS, because Al-Qaeda said, we excommunicate you. You're too bad even for us. And ISIS became worse. And ISIS formed out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq because we broke Iraq, and then we didn't actually pacify it. So yeah, it's people don't understand that we've been fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq or ISIS since not 2003, but maybe the first glimmers in 2004 and definitely 2005. So we've been fighting them for more than 20 years inside of Iraq. So that wasn't necessarily a new thing. The Iranian militias inside Iraq had been less of a problem, but they would still set up the occasional roadside bomb, cause some chaos, cause a riot, those kinds of things. But now, of course, they've been weaponized and they're going after harder targets and more violently.
And there are so many layers to this. As this seems to be expanding, this war, because you have Iran attacking U.S. installations in other neighboring countries. You have now Saudi Arabia and the U.S. attacking inside Iraq. And then behind all of that, you have these other deals that have been made, and Trump, sort of expropriating this earlier deal. I think it was actually maybe set up when he was president the first time, the IP3 energy deal with Saudi Arabia for nuclear power, the peace, power, and prosperity, international peace, power, and prosperity deal. And it looks like the Trump family might even be profiting from that.
That was a
So there's
Kushner thing.
all this potential conflicts of interest and with the wars, the conflicts swirling around, and it makes you wonder really what the motivations are behind some of this stuff. And it makes me worry even more, especially when I see that attack yesterday. And then I'm looking, just kind of peeling the layers back, and I'm looking at, the politics and the business that is going on over there too, and the money flowing around. This is really, it gets very complicated very quickly.
Yes.
I don't know what to make of it all, other than I'm really worried about where it's going.
I wish I saw a good outcome. Like I said, the least bad option is ground troops, and probably the least number of ground troops you'd have to commit would be, at this point, you're going to have to take over some of those islands in the actual Strait of Hormuz to guarantee a safe route for oil tankers. You'd have to take them and then fortify them with defensive measures. But you'd probably have to take Karg Island, which is their main export island, to force their hand. And we haven't done that. So Trump was talking about leverage with Zelensky, but we really don't have leverage against Iran right now. I mean, we can bomb them, but what have we done? We've made their government more hardline. We've entrenched them. We've made them harder to hit. There haven't been street protests. So the whole, rise up, you Iranian people, and overthrow your shackles. We were putting the Shah's son out there as a talking point, and Iranians hate the Shah to this day because the Shah was a bad guy and he had US backing. And then for the US to put his son out there is just like, I couldn't imagine this being stupider. But
and they did that with the Iranian version of MAGA, Make Iran Great Again, MIGA.
Yeah,
that guy. I'm like, I don't know if that's wise. Not good PR.
No, but somebody thought it was a good idea. But I mean, we've got a whole bunch of stupid going on right now, because Trump hasn't surrounded himself by smart or capable people yet. But all I can say is that I don't think we could put together a significant force. I'm talking 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 ground troops would be like an absolute minimum. But if we could do 5,000, 10,000, take some straight islands, take Karg Island, then we might have some leverage to actually stop this and at least make the Strait of Hormuz a free and open waterway again.
Well, what would come in really handy right now is if Trump had some friends and some allies to maybe back him up a little bit.
Almost like insulting and alienating all your allies was a bad idea.
Yeah, kind of.
Or going into this without consulting them. Because I think the only ally that we consulted for this was Israel. I don't think we talked to the Saudis. I don't think we talked to the Qataris, Kuwaitis, Iraqis, Oman, Bahrain. I don't think we talked to any of them.
I guess he figured he didn't need any friends at the time, but
somebody was feeding him a line that the U.S. military was the dominant superpower military on the globe, and maybe they even believed it without, like I said, on that the pro-Russian book, the anti-Ukrainian book, that, if you don't understand, it might sound plausible, but you dig just a little deeper and you realize how stupid it gets real fast. That the America's power came from, yes, we have a military that's astonishingly capable and very professional, but it's just one nation's military. We have a limited number of ships, a limited number of missiles, a limited amount of influence, because what you do creates influence, and it can create a sort of chain effect, like success breeds success kind of a thing. But if you don't have anybody that's willing to back you, we don't even have the British on our side. And the UK, if you can't get the UK on board, I don't know what you're doing. They talk about the special relationship between the U.S. and the Brits, where since World War II, we've been joined at the hip, sharing technology. I mean, the astonishing levels of technology sharing is just it. I can't think of two nations on the planet that share more closely. But we couldn't get the Brits on our side. Are you kidding me? Did you even try? And it's just astonishing to me. But like I said, I don't see any good options there. Ukraine has been doing some things for us. So as I said, Russia was getting help from Iran to go after Ukraine. So Ukraine's not going to be a big friend of Iran. In the last week or two, it used to be the Caspian Sea. I don't know how geographically well-versed your audience is, but the Caspian Sea is a landlocked sea just to the east of the Black Sea. It has no waterways, no natural waterway connecting it to any other body of water on the planet. It's fed by rivers. It has no outlets. Russia has created a canal system that you can get a certain level of ship in between the Caspian and the Black Sea. And then, of course, the Black Sea, you can go in the Bosporus Strait and get out to the rest of the oceans. But the Caspian Sea has been like this unrecognized, little thought of trading hub between Russia and Iran, especially, but it also gets into India and China. It can go through Kazakhstan, or it can use Iranian ports to get to India and China. That's how Russia was laundering a lot of their oil, for instance, to avoid sanctions. They would ship it to Iran with no payments. They'd just put it on ships and put it into Iran's oil supply. And then Iran would export it as if it was Iranian oil and sell it at market rates. It was one of the ways that Russia was getting around sanctions. So Ukraine recently started going after ships in the Caspian Sea. They've knocked out a couple of tankers, a couple of patrol craft, several missile craft that were more immediate to the war because they had actually been launching cruise missiles out of the Caspian Sea from naval craft. So, but yeah, there's been recent Ukrainian strikes into the Caspian Sea that have hurt Iran.
Yeah, which just shows the overlap of the two wars.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Iranian shaheeds have killed how many Ukrainian civilians? You could make the argument that Iran already declared war on Ukraine years ago.
Yeah. Take a short break and come back, and we'll get into the final leg of this. And I have to run this for one of our moderators, Linda, because today she told me that, well, she just loves this song.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah.
Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah 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 blah.
Blah blah blah. Blah blah blah.
Maverick News. No blah, blah, blah.
Okay, we're back. So, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up or focus on?
I mean, you already showed. I sent a video in that same email that had all the pictures.
Yeah.
Let me see if I sent anything else that I
have it here. Do you want me to run that?
Yeah, so what this is a relatively recent I'd like to say this is Kupiansk, but I might be wrong. And I never showed those maps. We should probably show one of those. Did I send tactical maps?
I do have some maps, yeah.
Yeah, we just to give a sense of what's going on. But this is, I think it's in the Konstantinivka direction, but I might be wrong. But it just gives you a visual, picture is worth 1,000 words kind of a thing, flavor of oh, not this.
No.
So what this is this is how you turn a civilian target into a military target. But this is in Moscow on a civilian highway overpass, and that is a Panzer surface-to-air missile battery that they just parked on a civilian overpass. And according to the laws of war, that civilian overpass, depending on what was nearby and what it was used for, could potentially be a military target in some circumstances, but usually it wouldn't be worth the time or the effort to hit. But once you put the missile defense and the missile defense radar on top of it, now it's become a prime target where any protection it has, any protection that it would have had is now not only gone, but now it's like top of the list of targets. So just in terms of how Russia thinks, this is in Moscow. Oops. So there was another video that I sent about let me make sure it's the right video. Nope. Sorry. All right. No, well, hold on. Let me send it to you right now. Sorry for the delay, folks.
I think maybe I have it here.
All right, they're still attaching. All right, it's sent. Hopefully it'll get there soon. So one of these is Ukrainian. That's something we completely didn't talk about because Ukraine had destroyed so many trucks and so many roads and so many railroads and railroad trains. Getting into Crimea, there were something like 200 Russian oil tankers in the Sea of Azov that were helping to supply Crimea with oil. And Ukraine has hit at least 200 of them just in the last 2 weeks, just an astonishing number. That's one of them. The other one is a little bit of PG, maybe R, but they don't show any corpses, ground combat in the the Konstantinivka direction, taking some Russian prisoners. And it gives you, like, picture is worth 1,000 words flavor of what at least urban conflict might look like over there.
Okay, there it is. Okay, let me see if I can download these. I can put this map up in the moment. Maybe you can explain what this is right here.
Yeah. So this is, if you zoom in, this is the red is currently occupied Ukrainian territory, Russian occupied Ukraine. You can see that city of Melitopol has a big dashed blue line. That isn't Ukrainian control, but that is heavy Ukrainian partisan activity. Most of the Ukrainian partisans in Russian occupied territory are women. The vast majority have been victims of rape by Russian soldiers, and they're pissed. And so what they do is they catfish and or honeypot, depending on which term you prefer, Russian soldiers on the front line. Their goal is to get the Russian soldiers that, they'll pretend to be, sweet on them. And a Russian on the front line is not a happy person. So this isn't as hard of a task as you might think, but they try and, sweet talk them into telling them about where they are. In some cases, the partisan efforts have been as quickly as 15 minutes after the Russian soldier gives location identifiers, a drone lands and kills the soldier while the Ukrainian partisan woman is actually still chatting with them online. So it's the Ukrainians have been turning the tables on them pretty hard. But also in the Melitopol area, that's on one of the roads, they're destroying bridges, taking out all sorts of things. There's heavy partisan activity inside of supposedly Russian occupied territory. It does give you a sense of how little of Ukraine Russia actually controls. People think, oh, Russia is invading Ukraine. And I made the mistake. Personally, I made the mistake early in this podcast that I actually did look at the one of the chats, and they're like, Ukraine's on its last legs. I'm like, so the last 6 months, in previous years, so 23 and 24, in 2022, Russia invaded a lot, gained a lot of ground, and then later in 22, Ukraine retook a lot of that ground. Since then, so 23, 24, and 25, Russia had been gaining roughly 2,000 square miles of Ukrainian territory. This was at a cost of hundreds of thousands of troops, so that we had that big fight from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk, which was about 30 miles, and Russia lost something like 250,000 troops just doing that. Something like 1 out of every 6 Russian soldiers that have fallen within 20 miles of Pokrovsk. Is just a weird thought. But in 2026, Ukraine's ground them to a halt. There have been some months where Russia might have gained something like 14 square miles. There's other months where Ukraine gained 40 square miles. And this is net. This is the lines bubble where Ukraine will advance some places and Russia will advance in others. This here is the fight for Konstantinivka. This is the southernmost city of the fortress belt, Ukraine's fortress belt, that is keeping Russia from going further, deeper into Ukraine. Is heavily fortified. Like, you wouldn't, if you hadn't seen them, you would have problems comprehending the level of fortifications there are here. So this map looks like a boiling mass of different colors, and that should give you a clue on the chaos that's going on. So there's these seemingly isolated blue parts that are current documented areas that Ukraine has fortified. They have significant amounts of soldiers there. Those are Ukrainian positions that they are, forcing the Russians to bleed hundreds and thousands of men trying to take. That dashed line is what they call Russian infiltration. So in 23 and 24, and then into 25 a little bit, Russia was trying to do armored attacks with tanks and armored fighting vehicles, things like that. That hasn't gone, so it's kind of gone away. Russia kind of went to this infiltration thing, where one of the things they'll do is they'll send 1 or 2 soldiers with a flag to go someplace and hold the flag up for a drone so they can take a picture. That's the stupid kind of infiltration. Those guys are dead. They didn't do anything other than give a picture that the generals can show Putin. But they also do a different kind of infiltration where they'll send them in 1s and 2s and 3s, but they'll send a whole bunch of 1s and 2s and 3s. And they'll be saying, look, we're sending you over here. Don't go too far to the left or the right of this set path. You're going to meet at this location. And what they do is they'll try and send 1s and 2s and 3s, and enough of them make it, they might be able to they might send like 100, 200, 300 out in 1s and 2s and 3s so that they can get 20, 30, 40 people at one location. The rest of them are dead. But they try and build up a force that is then militarily competent to do something in a more forward location. So those striped lines are documented Russian infiltration attempts. And you can just see how boiling and chaotic, and they're behind us, but we're behind them kind of fighting there is right now in Konstantinivka. And it's just, it's a mess.
And again, this is a key strategic location, right? And explain again why.
Kind of. So the fortress belt is, it was built in several cities. So once you have a city, there's a lot of natural fortifications. Every building, every cellar, every wall, every street has certain military implications in terms of protection or open fields of fire, or sight lines, any number of things. Building tops, just all sorts of things you can do with a city in terms of both offense and defense. But they heavily favor the defender, a city does. And there were 4 major cities in the eastern part of Ukraine that were also in rougher terrain. So there's going to be water features, there's going to be hills, there's going to be valleys. So like I mentioned, with cities are more easily defended. Once you have water features and hills and valleys and things like that, that also adds to the defensive capabilities. To the west of this is much more open terrain. So if Russia can break through, they might actually be able to mount a mechanized assault in terms of tanks and trucks. They don't really have many tanks left, but they might be able to move faster. Because there are fewer places that the Ukrainians can easily defend. But this goes to the Ukraine is just making them pay for every bit of every square foot is being paid for in blood. If you run the math on how far they've advanced in 2023, 2024, 25, and 26, Russia's paid something like 1,200 soldiers per square kilometer. That comes out to a little bit more than 3,000 soldiers per square mile. And that's, if you think about a square mile, it's not actually that big. And if you're paying 3,000 soldiers for it, it's the idea that we're going to bleed them dry. They have the advantage in manpower, and they are going to have to spend it, and they're going to have to spend heavily to get anywhere. So that has been the core Iranian defensive tactic is just you make them Russia's pay and pay and pay and pay. And it's having its effects. Russia's lost 1.5 million or so soldiers. They recently had an attack that was better documented in terms of large scale, where I mentioned this before, where traditionally you're going to have more wounded than you're going to have killed. And when you're talking about the U.S., the Americans in Afghanistan and all of NATO in Afghanistan and the Americans in Iraq, it was better than 10-1. And sometimes it was 100-1, where you would have a certain number of people hit, but only one of them would die. Because we just, the nature of the fighting and our quality of medical care and all that kind of stuff. This is flipped on its head in Russia now. So this attack, they documented 129 killed and 30 injured. And so roughly 4-1 on killed to injured. And this is completely out of step with any war of the last 100 years. Even in World War II, you would have more wounded than you would have killed. This is an update on earlier in the war, you would have tractors grabbing a burnt out Russian tank and towing it away. This is a Ukrainian tractor that picked up a fallen spoofed Shahed drone that evidently did not blow up when it hit. So that gives you a little bit of a size idea on what these Shahed drones are. This is definitely a propeller driven one. You can see it on the back. But yeah, I just thought it was, the Ukrainian Farmer Brigade. It's an updated picture. So it just kind of amused me.
And is this image related to that?
Oh, no. This was just where I've been recently. This is the Great Sand Dunes in Colorado. This was me sending this as like, just on completely unrelated. Yeah. So I had some issues to deal with my wife's parents who are not doing well. So we drove down to New Mexico, but I chose to drive through Colorado, and we climbed up some of the sand dunes, and you can see from the cloud shadows, this is, it's in the middle. The floor of the valley is at, I think, 7,500 feet of elevation. Some of those dunes are 1,000, 1,500 feet tall from the valley floor. It's just this unique geographic thing. Sorry to put that up. I meant to explain that to you before that I was, but yeah, you go visit Great Sand Dunes. It's a great place.
I was in Colorado once. I don't even really remember why, but I remember that I liked it there. It was a beautiful place.
Colorado is not where I was born, but it is where I claim to be home.
Yeah.
I lived in Colorado between 1980 and 1998. And that's always home to me. The mountains and all that. So.
Okay. What else do we have? We have these videos.
Did you get those video? Yeah, that's what
Yes.
we were waiting for.
Yeah.
We'll see which one you queue up first. So this is the ship. This is a Ukrainian either FP1 or FP2 drone. So that's
So what are we looking at here?
So this is a sanctioned Russian tanker that they were using to refuel their soldiers on the front lines in either southern Ukraine or resupply Crimea air defenses and jet fighters and the rest with fuel. Side note here, you might not think about it, but all those Shahed drones with their propellers, they need fuel to actually fly. And if you can't fuel your drones, you can't launch the drone. That's a sanctioned Russian oil tanker. It was in the Sea of Azov. It's probably still there because that one doesn't look like it sank. but they had 200 of them that they were trying to use, not as designed, because this was a small tanker that is supposed to go from a shallow port and go into deep enough water so it can fill up one of those gigantic oil tankers to ship across the oceans. But they were trying to go from Russia proper into Crimea and then into southern occupied Ukraine, the port of Bryansk, places like that, to resupply Russian forces. And again, trying to cut off the Russian military from its ability to conduct war inside of Ukraine, they started going after those tankers. And you can see that one hit the bridge. That's also where the engines are on these tankers. So if you can take out the bridge, is going to have the controls. They might or might not have spent enough money to have a secondary conning position elsewhere in the ship. The Russians aren't known for these kinds of safety measures on their construction of any type. So just hitting the bridge might make the tanker completely useless. For that matter, a navigation hazard to other tankers. But that's what they were doing. They hit the bridge with, it looked like it was an FP2 drone to me, but I might be wrong. You can kill the music. But this is in the Sloviansk direction. This is what it might look like if you are either a defender or one of those Russians unfortunate enough to be the attacker. This is from the Ukrainian perspective. That's a relatively well-equipped infantryman right there. They've got a modern helmet with night vision and some modern encrypted radios, and that's pretty well. Those are Russians that surrendered that are marching across the open ground there. You can see what used to be trees. Now they're just sticks. You can see what's left of this building. So even if Russia conquers this, this is what they're conquering. I don't know what they're gaining once they get Konstantinivka. This is somewhere in the building, hopefully deep, deep, deep. So that just gives you a flavor of what at least a good day of being an infantryman might be like. You're in a hellscape, but you're taking Russian prisoners.
Well, what else? Anything? Are we, I don't know.
Did you want to find some sort of upbeat way of ending? So I will say that it's funny because Iran is the dumbest war ever. Secretary of Defense Hegseth is utterly incompetent. He isn't even smart enough to know that he's incompetent. That's how bad it is. But you can turn to Ukraine, and in the last 2 years, Ukraine has been trying to shape the battlefield by going after Russia's ability to make war. And in the last 6 months, it's been starting to pay off. Russia has managed to recruit. I wouldn't say they're training them. Just so you know, I have 8 weeks of basic training and 4 weeks of combat training, and then time in combat zones, carrying weapons, things like that. I have at least some experience, 22 years in military, leading teams of other military members, leading international teams in some situations. These Russian recruits are sometimes between from when they're pulled off the street and they hit the front lines, might be as little as 10 days. That's enough to get them some version of a uniform and transported over there, basically. Some of the lucky ones might get 4 weeks of training, which is not enough to make a soldier, but I don't know how many people understand that just a properly trained infantryman is a highly skilled individual if you do it right. So for instance, the United States Marines, you have 16 weeks of basic training. That's when you learn how to be a Marine, just in a very basic sense. And then the Marines go to 16 weeks of infantry school, where they learn how to be an infantryman in a very basic sense. These are the schools that get you to the very basic entry level point of a Marine unit, so that once you get to an infantry or a tank unit, you get yet further training, right, to actually become a competent military service member. That's a lot of training. That's 32 weeks just to get to your first unit. You can start out at the entry level positions. But these Russian recruits, they might be lucky if they get 4 weeks. They probably haven't learned about a stack. They don't know about a flying wedge. They don't know about fire superiority. They don't know about fire suppression. They don't know about covering fire. They don't know how to call in an airstrike. They don't know how to call for a medevac. They don't know anything, but they're sent to the front lines. They have to replace about 1,200 soldiers every single day, because that's the level of casualties that Ukraine is inflicting on the Russian military. So far in 2026, they've been able to recruit about 1,050. It's anywhere from 1,000 to 1,100, which you can see might be as much as 200 soldier deficit every day. And that adds up. Putin stated a goal of delivering 675,000 Russian soldiers to the front lines. They've so far managed to do 190,000 in 7 months. So they're more than halfway through the year, and they haven't even remotely reached 50% of his goal. With all of these things, there's going to be a certain breaking point where a soldier that can't get enough bullets, can't get enough food, can't even get enough fresh, clean water to drink. His boots wore out 3 months ago. He can't get new ones. There's no command and control. He can't even, his radio doesn't work because he can't power it. It long run out of batteries, if not just broke because it was a piece of junk that came out of a Russian factory. There's a certain point where Russia's military is just going to become completely militarily incompetent, that they just will cease to function as a military at all. So when I talk about Ukrainian shaping operations and all of these attacks on their supply lines, that's what we're talking about, that at some point Russia's military just won't be able to do anything. The last 6 months, the Ukrainians have actually been able to succeed in that. There's been no territorial gains to speak of. Ukraine has recaptured as much territory as Russia's been able to capture, if not a little bit more. Ukraine has taken more Russian soldiers off the battlefield than Russia's been able to recruit or send to the battlefield, much less train. So the tide is turning in Ukraine, and starting January, I timidly put my toe into the question of, is Ukraine actually winning? And now that we're in July, I'm like, Ukraine is on the verge of actually pulling something off here. They're not quite there yet. They haven't developed the battlefield quite enough yet. But they're getting there. They've got a couple of air defense missiles on their way. They're about to use their first domestically produced ballistic missile. They'll have a counter to Russia's ballistic missiles. And it's far more accurate. There's good reason to be optimistic about Ukraine's ability to win this war. Not just hold their own and keep the Russians at bay, actually win. It's not going to happen in 2026. I think it would be optimistic, absent something happening on the Russian side catastrophically bad. I don't think it's going to happen in 2027, but it might. But I think we're 4.5 years in, and if I'm saying a year from now, in second half of 2027, Ukraine might be looking at victory conditions, that's an astonishing thing to say. And a year ago, I would not have considered saying that, like, at all. That would have been fantasy land. But now with the events on the ground, I've always said that Russia can't win. There's just no way. Ukraine is too independent. That grandmother on the first day of the invasion that walked right up to a Russian Spetsnaz, that's their special forces, and handed him sunflower seeds to put in his pocket. And when the Russian soldier asked why, she said, because when you die and your corpse is buried in the mud and forgotten, then sunflowers will grow out of your corpse to beautify Ukraine. That was the first day of the war, and that was a Ukrainian grandmother saying that. From that point on, I knew that Russia couldn't win. There was just no way that Russia is going to be able to win that. But now I've turned all the way to saying Ukraine's got a shot at winning sometime in the next 18 months.
And so what does winning look like?
Winning for Ukraine looks like Russia giving up and leaving Ukraine. They're on the verge of that in Crimea. Crimea is not, you can't work there anymore. There's no oil, there's no water, there's no power. You can't resupply at all. Russians are fleeing, civilians are fleeing. That port in Sevastopol has already been given up. Russia moved their fleet to further south and east, close to Turkey, actually. And even there, they're getting attacked. So the airfields in Crimea are getting attacked daily. They're almost unusable. There is precedence, and the only other time in history I can think of where a military was so ill supplied and had suffered so much that they simply walked away was the Imperial Russian Army on the Eastern Front, their Western Front, but in World War I, it was the Eastern Front. They simply walked away. They just had reached a breaking point, and they like, I can't live here. I'm going to take my chances on walking away. Maybe they'll kill me if I walk away. Maybe they can't find me if enough of us leave. And the Russian military just evaporated in the 1917 at the end of World War I. So the only other example of what I'm talking about, the Russian army did. So there's precedence in the Russian army. But that's one of the ways this could end, is the Russian army simply walks away or gives up en masse. The other is the economic situation inside Russia. Wild berries is one example. The oil is another example. Or Putin tries to do one step too far because he relies on other mafiosos, oligarchs inside of Russia as his power base. Some of them he's killed off. They mysteriously fell out of 10-story windows. But not all of them, because he needs somebody to project his power. At some point, they're going to say, look, we can't survive this if you keep doing this, and maybe Putin will get overthrown. Putin is in his 70s now, in a country where the average lifespan for a man is in their 60s. So he's already beaten the odds for a Russian man. He might just die. So there's any number of ways this could end, where the Putin dying just collapses everything. But I think the most likely is that the Russian army is just going to cease be able to fight, and it's just going to end because they can't fight anymore.
I have noticed one thing in the last, I don't know, couple of months. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm missing it, but Putin for a while kept threatening, suggesting that nuclear weapons might be an option, and he was moving weapons, within striking distance along the Belarusian border. But I haven't heard that kind of rhetoric from him of late.
I think enough people have pushed back, including President Biden, pushed back hard, and various NATO leaders. French President Macron has Putin's ear. He's one of the few people that can semi-regularly talk to Putin. And France has its own nuclear arsenal independent to the United States. They have all of their nukes are domestically sourced, domestically produced, as opposed to the UK that uses American weapons under British control, but they're American weapons. I think the pushback on that would be so hard that I think even it got through to Putin. Because like I've said more than once, fallout and radiation don't know anything about national borders. And he's been told in no uncertain terms that if he pops off even a single tiny nuke inside, we're talking 1 kiloton is one of tactical nukes can be pretty small. The Hiroshima bomb was 17 kilotons. And so we're talking 1/17 the size of Hiroshima. Just a small tactical nuke. If he pops one of those off, NATO's going to come hard after him because they're going to treat that like an attack on NATO. And they have some justification for it because fallout. And if you allow somebody to pop off one nuke, they're going to pop off a second. So if they pop off one nuke, you cannot allow that to stand. You just can't. I think even China has said that to them, like you can't use nukes. And China is one of Russia's main suppliers of drones and also boots, uniforms. A lot of Russian supply comes out of China. So yeah, I don't think that. I think he was always just trying to scare people that were scarable. And I don't think that that was. He might have thought it was a serious threat, but I never saw that as a likely outcome. If that makes sense. Yeah, it was made to intimidate people, and
because
it didn't intimidate a lot of people.
Because I think the last time you were on, there were some influential voices within Russia talking about using a nuclear weapon, not only just against Ukraine, but maybe against a European target in order to reestablish a nuclear deterrent.
That wouldn't have established a nuclear deterrent. That would have started an all-out war.
Right.
Yeah.
So
can you imagine
like absolute insanity?
Can you imagine a nuke popping off over Berlin or Frankfurt or Antwerp or Coventry or, any reasonably, it doesn't even have to be a big one like London or Berlin. It could be Krakow, or it could be Frankfurt, or it could be Kiel or Antwerp or anything like that. A city destroyed by a nuke. I mentioned going after civilians, that you're just going to make people mad. Like, I would be furious if that happened. Like, I might actually get on a plane and go fight if they popped off a nuke. That's how furious I'd be. But the governments wouldn't stand for it. Even if Trump was an idiot, the combined military power of the rest of NATO, Poland has a very serious army right now. It's the biggest army in Europe. It's probably bigger than Russia's at this point, at least more competent, better equipped, better trained. Germany is rebuilding. Sweden has some power. Finland has some power. The UK has some serious weaponry. France, even without the US, the rest of Europe could beat Russia with what they have right now.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope it's not something they're looking at as a real option.
I hope not. I think Putin's still testing the boundaries, like what we talked about early. There's been a lot of stupid going on the last few years. So I really hope I'm not wrong. I really hope people aren't that stupid. But we've seen a lot of stupid. So, yeah.
And on that note, I suppose it's appropriate to wrap up. Bottom of the hour. And hopefully tomorrow. Well, I don't know. We're not over stupid yet. And with that, folks, Mike, is there anything you want to add?
No,
before
I think we pretty much said it all.
All right. And with that, I'll leave you with Putin Nukem tonight until I see you tomorrow, Mavericks, at 7 p.m. Eastern on the flip side.
Putin's got a plan, sitting in the Kremlin, dreaming of the days when the Soviets were winning. Ukraine's on its way out, NATO in his sight, but its soldiers keep retreating from the fight. Putin Nukem, you got a thing you can't touch. Putin Nukem, you got a war hanging up. The world's on edge, he's losing his game. mushroom clouds, it's his final crown. Put new color, you got a reason, gone. Put new color, you got he sings his swan song. The whole world's watching, hold his breath while he dances with the devil of death. Put new color, you got. 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 Put you got. Put you got. Put you got.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.